Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. We are currently sitting in Rockfield in Monmouthshire in Wales, and we've been doing a masterclass where today we're going to be doing mixing. Say hello everybody.
Hello everybody.
I was waiting for the hello everybody. So we're going to do a Fact Friday, frequently asked questions Friday. So who has a question?
I have a question.
Patrick.
We were just discussing earlier today the efficacy of having your mixing into your Masterbus effects, you know, your limiter and your compressor and all that. Do you recommend doing that, or do you recommend mixing first and then adding the effects later?
The one-word answer is depends. Next. No, seriously, because I feel like with some things, like if I was doing a really slamming, aggressive track, I'd probably have like compression and limiting right from the get-go, because I want that to be, I wouldn't say crushed, but I'd want it to be quite aggressive. But if I was doing a jazz band, a piano vocal, I'd be doing that very sparingly. I'd be thinking about that at the end. How can I just kiss it and maybe tame a few things that I couldn't do? And then, of course, anything in between. There's situations where I've done it and I haven't done it. Now, when I was only mixing hybrid, or mainly mixing hybrid on the SSL, I had the SSL bus compressor tapping away, and I had a pair, still have them, pair of Pultec mastering EQs. And so there was always like a little tiny bit of 10K and a little tiny bit of 60 going on and a little tapping going on the console. And so I was always mixing that through. Now, this is where I might differ from a lot of people. I'm nervous about sticking a plug-in on my Masterbus, you know, so used to hardware. So I'm very particular about it. I got used to trusting my SSL, well, this is an MCI, but I got used to trusting my SSL bus compressor because thousands of records that I loved were done on those. So I would definitely mix through it, even on some of the more jazzier acoustic things. But ultimately, if I'm mixing entirely in the box, I really believe that unless it's something quite aggressive, I'll leave it till later on. So it's a depends for me. And I know a lot of people have a way of working, and that's okay, because they might be in a genre. If you're in a genre and people come to you specifically to mix a certain kind of song, a certain kind of style, and you find something that works, that's fine to repeat it. But I know what you do, Patrick. I mean, you're quite eclectic. I think you just have to sort of like pick and choose what you want it to be on, you know?
This wonderful masterclass with wonderful people, and we had some really interesting discussions, and one that I had today, because I'm really interested in this. What is the difference if I mix for a stereo mix or if I mix for an Atmos mix? So we had this discussion, and one point was, okay, first you do your stereo mix, then you do stems out of that, and then you put into Atmos. That was one opinion. But are there different opinions, different approaches to this?
Absolutely. Since it's become more of a thing over the last 6 or 7 years, we've interviewed Dave Way, we've interviewed Hans, Martin Buff, and of course Emre Ramazulu, you know, all of these incredible Atmos mixers. And Emre, of course, did the Ken Scott, Ziggy Stardust with Ken. The best way to do it is sort of explain everybody's methodology. So with Emre, he brought up the multi-tracks that were recorded and originally mixed, produced even, by Ken Scott. And if you bring them up on fader, whether it be on a console or in a box, it sounds like the record. So it was recorded the way they wanted to hear it. Mixing would have been more like, oh, let's turn up the vocal here, let's bring up the solo. That was how they mixed. Maybe they muted a couple of things, but ultimately they weren't saving the song on the mixing console. So when it comes to doing an Atmos version of that, I mean, if you watch the video that we did with him, I'm sure Eric will put a link down there. He talked about the fact that I think there was some songs he used 2 compressors on, and some songs he didn't even use a compressor on any of it, because it was recorded by Ken, who knew exactly what he wanted, committed to sounds. So it was just panning, not even stems, the actual multi-tracks around. Now, there are other people that, going back to Patrick's question about Masterbus, that the whole sound of the song is how it's being, you know, sent through busing. It's not committed individual tracks, but it's in the actual mix itself. So if you sent somebody the multi-tracks, they would spend a day just trying to get it to sound like the song, like the final song. So in those situations, they tend to print stems. They print like maybe stereo guitars or all this stuff, or at least print it through the Masterbus so it sounds like the final record. And I know people that only want to mix Atmos using stems. So the answer is really, what's the project? How is it recorded? And probably more importantly, are you the same person that is recording and mixing the stereo that is also going to do the Atmos? Because a lot of people that are working knowing that they're doing both versions might actually be spending their time working in both at the same time. I know a couple of people that sit there thinking about an Atmos, folding it down to stereo and vice versa. Their brain is in two places. And I think long term, I think that might become more prevalent. They might be sort of thinking about how both things are working. And then, of course, there's Hans, who did probably the best Atmos immersive mix with Peter Gabriel I.O. I don't know if I've heard anything better yet, but that was only an Atmos mix. That's all he did. So it was completely about what is the final. There was no, he said when I interviewed him, he did not care how it sounded in stereo. It was specifically done to be an immersive mix, where they had already done the dark and bright side mixes with Spike Stent and Chad Blake had done the stereo versions, 2 versions in stereo. So now the immersive one was its own thing. So yeah, that's a whole different situation. So I think there's no answer to that question. It's a little bit like Patrick's question. So it depends. But I do think as we go through this and things get easier to understand and the technology is getting better to work in Atmos and in immersive, I think that the same person doing the stereo mix is also going to be doing the immersive, and they will be thinking about that at the same time. And those decisions will be made depending on the song. So there's no one answer to that one, unfortunately.
With technology the way it is and this sort of renaissance where anybody can mix on a laptop, on an airplane, and all these new, devices and things that are coming out in that world, what do you think what are your feelings about the future of like legacy studios like Rockfield? How do you think that they're going to, the evolution of something like this?
Honestly, I think we're already sort of there. I don't think any of the technology at this point that can change, whether it be AI or whatever we want to talk about, is really going to affect. It's already taken place. I think the digital revolution, 10 years ago when we started the channel, we were talking about the democratization of the music industry. That was 10 years ago. I think we're 10 years into it. I think the Sunset Sounds, the Rockfields, the Abbey Roads, the Air, the Racks, these studios, Power Station, with these massive legacies of albums are always going to be those studios. If somebody wants to do a score for a movie and they've got the opportunity to go to Abbey Road Studio One where, all these massive movies were done and also casually the Beatles recorded, they're going to do it any day of the week. And that room is booked out 2 years in advance for a reason. So even though you can do it in another way, given the opportunity, people will do it. And I know budgets you'd have to have a pretty high budget to do it, but as long as it's justified in the ways that you can make money, obviously movies are number one, but video games. The other day I was listening to the Rest is Entertainment podcast and they were talking about the movie industry. California is going to make $6 billion this last fiscal year, and one game is projected to make $8 billion. A game. And they have budgets and they hire people in music and they do it well and they do it properly and they don't worry about the cost because they know they're going to make the money back on the other side. So there is plenty of work that's going to go into classic studios. If I want to do a classic rock record, why would I not want to come to a place that did Hemispheres and 2112 and A Night at the Opera or Paranoid or anything, or Silver Machine, Hawkwind? That's always going to last. I think we're already at that point, regardless of AI even. But at the same time, if you're a modern studio and you're starting a studio, you've got to think, well, how can I recreate that? It's almost like an outliers kind of, I know it's not cool to talk about Malcolm Gladwell anymore, but the outliers kind of thing. How can you do that yourself? Well, you know what? Create your own boutique space. You know, there are plenty of classic old consoles which are more affordable these days. You know, build a more boutique-y kind of business and create that feeling, you know, the romanticism of going into a studio like that, you know. So come into your studio and you've got a console, you've got a handful of choice pieces of equipment, and you also have learned and honed your skills in getting performances out of people. That is going to make a massive difference. And honestly, the more AI grows, the more that is going to seem like a real punk rock way of working. You know what? I want to do this for real. I don't want to have this perfect thing. I want to have some humanity. So I don't see any of the technology stuff as really being threatening, unless you want to lay over, you know, roll over and die and go, oh, you know, it's like anything. Talking to Nick this morning, I'm sure the interview will be up after this next week. And he started here at 16. By the time he was 17, he had done a Stone Roses record, the second Stone Roses album. Then he went into the second Oasis record and recorded Wonderwall by, you know, 17, 18 years old. You know, by the time he was 25 or 26, he was producing massive albums. He said that he flew to New York and recorded Bruce Springsteen at 24 or 25 years old. I won't say how much he didn't get paid, because it was insane. He was working for next to nothing. He was working 100 hours a week as a teenager and just like piling himself into it. My point is, if this is not a business you get into because it looks like fun and a great way of making money, you know, you have to absolutely love this if you want to do this. And my point is like, he was in the golden era. In 93, we're talking about when Britpop was massive all over the world, money was coming out of everybody's ears, and he still had to work 100 hours a week. So, you know, I know all of us, myself included, we all love to, you know, have this kind of rose-tinted spectacle of the past and like, oh, the budgets were higher and everything was so much easier. Yes, but everybody still worked their butts off. So I think things are different, but the same. You know what I mean? I still think do something, have a boutique-y business where you specialize in performance, you specialize in getting great sounds, you hone your skills as an arranger and a producer and an engineer and a mixer and maybe a musician as well, throw it all together, co-writer, songwriter. If you're good at those things and you hone them, I'm not threatened by the technology. But if you want a quick way of making money, move on.
In the landscape where everyone has a home studio now and you can make a Grammy-winning record, you know, in your home studio.
Potentially, yes.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
What would you say to the artists that are coming up to get them to come out and go to a studio such as Rockfield, a wonderful place like this, or even their local, every place has a close by studio?
I don't think it's really changed that dramatically. I mean, I'm of an age group where it was, well, you know, 2 cassette players, but 4 tracks. You know, 4 tracks was big in the 80s and early 90s, and then we moved into ADATs, and you know, so I had a home studio that had ADATs and a Soundtracks Topaz, and then I had 4 tracks before that. It's sort of just natural selection. I think everybody goes through creative experiences in their life, and it's more about like how they explore it. I think if the artist really wants to hone their skills, get their art to be better still, they're going to seek collaboration. And I think that's the answer to your question, is make sure that you project that feeling of collaboration, like you are there to help facilitate an artist, because it doesn't matter if you're, you know, Paul McCartney. We can start right at the top, Paul McCartney or Paul Smith. You get your best work when you work with others. Let's make sure that you know, those artists that you're talking about can find you, number one. They can find you, that you can show off your skills for what you do, have an environment where they feel safe and they can come in and create, because that's just a part of growing up for your musical growth. I'm not threatened by somebody having a lot of gear in their house. I know a lot of people have a lot of gear in their house, and eventually at some point in their life, if they're really trying to get better at their craft, they start gravitating to people that can help them. So, and the ones that don't would never have done it. You know, I think that's true of anything in life, isn't it? We worry about like the people that we're going to lose. We would have lost them anyway if they weren't interested in doing it. They really want to get better. You know, Paul McCartney still works with producers, and yet there's not a person in this room that wouldn't want to be produced by Paul McCartney. Everybody's a fan of somebody. So I have my very good friend, Mr. Josh Hills here, who is a... How are you, Josh?
I'm doing well, hi.
Not only are you taller than me, you're sitting in a chair which is also 4 inches higher than me. So hi there. How are you doing? Anyway, so you're a mastering engineer, my friend.
Yes.
So apparently, Nicky over here is questioning about mastering.
Yeah, so as everybody can also master themselves after they have done a mix, what is the 1 or 2 things that you think a mastering engineer can bring up to a mixing engineer who's already mastered their stuff themselves?
There are 2 different things. Obviously with AI, mastering is accessible to everybody now. You know, you can just go to one of these websites, eMaster, Lander, and they can produce a sonic master for your music. But with a professional mastering engineer, they're going to have essentially access to gear you don't have, like ultra high-end monitoring systems, and they're also going to have years of experience and perspective from just mastering thousands of tracks, which you're not going to get from doing it yourself in a highly tuned environment. So if you're going to a leading mastering engineer, they're going to be able to essentially have a unbiased view, objective view of your track, and then be able to polish it to achieve the best it can be. Why AI is really good, I don't think it's going to be replacing mastering engineers fully or anytime soon, because it's only really focusing on the sonic stage. It's not looking at how your music's been curated. For example, the program, how is the album, how's the spread presented to the audience. And it's also not really looking at metadata, platform, how to optimize it for certain deliveries, whether it's going on, say, vinyl or digital distribution. So I think this is something which is still very much kept within mastering houses. And one of the main things you'll be getting, you're really paying for their experience and their understanding of the process to really push your music and give it that final layer of polish.
When you get to tracks, what is it you're looking for when you look at a track as far as the process of mastering? What is it like a broad stroke type of thing?
So I'm going to give the age-old answer. It depends. It really depends.
There you go. Next.
It ultimately, it depends if I've got a single track or if I'm given an entire album which needs mastering, whether the client wants a traditional stereo master or whether they're giving you the group stems and you're doing a stemmer master where you have more control over correcting issues within the material. So it really depends on what you're being given. But ultimately, as a mastering engineer, what I'm trying to do is to take the best elements of the mix and bring them forward, and then also ensure that the mix is presented well across a range of different systems. And it doesn't matter whether it's played in the car, on AirPods, headphones, that it sounds balanced and it transfers extremely well. And that's my main goal.
I personally have not had a good time with mastering engineers asking me for stems. It ends up coming back like they're rebalancing my mix to make it mean something else. And I've only been asked that once, and I had the experience, and I was like, I'm not going to do that. But I do understand that stems could be good, as you said, if they're correcting something, and maybe the mastering engineer thinks the only way they can solve a problem is to be able to get in there. Do you first, before you ask for stems, maybe say to the producer, engineer, mixer, try doing these tweaks first? Because the things I've enjoyed about working with great mastering engineers is they actually help my mixers be better.
Yeah, it kind of goes into the question asked earlier. It's one of the things which you're paying for when you get a mastering engineer. You're paying for their opinion and their expertise. So most of the time, you always go back to the mixer. If there's something which can be fixed in the mix and you suggest to the mixing engineer, hey, can you make these adjustments? This will get the best out of your master. As a mastering engineer, personally, I try to not go down the stem option. If it comes from a reputable mixing engineer or somebody who's very good at their craft, you don't need access to the stems. It's normally people who are producing the album at home, or they're not a confident mixing engineer and they want to have it professionally mastered. When I may request to have access to the stems to fix specific issues, or if they just come to me direct saying, look, here's the stems, you want a stem master. But if it's from a reputable mastering engineer, from a reputable studio, you do not need to have access to the stems, and you can basically take the stereo file and produce a brilliant master, which will transfer really well.
There's always a lot of information and conflicting information about what you should have on the mix bus and what you shouldn't have on the mix bus. What is your opinion about limiting on the mix bus or having a really hot mix already that's competing for getting to a mastering engineer?
If it's a really hot mix, that's not something I'm super concerned about. As long as it's dynamically balanced, that's the most important thing. If there's issues with the mix where the compression hasn't been executed very well throughout the mix, really it needs to go back into the mixing stage to correct those issues, because you're not going to be able to master it and get the best out of the track or the album. If we are looking at a really hot mix which is well balanced, I can just bring the overall level down and start mastering the track. If the mix is poorly put together and it can't be mastered, I'll communicate that, and mastering engineers normally send the mix back. But the mastering process, we need all of any limiting needs to be taken off your master bus. Mixed bus compression, some mastering engineers don't mind having a bit of mixed bus compression on. So if you're mixing into your bus compressor, that's fine. I personally like everything off because that just allows me to.
But do you want to hear what everybody else has been hearing though?
Yes, so we would normally ask for a reference. So what I do with a lot of like local level clients who come through to the studio for a master is I actually ask for their finished master or the version which they've done in the house, just so I have an idea. Because normally mixing into a mixed bus compressor doesn't really cause that many issues.
Yeah.
But what you do find is if you have somebody who mixes into a limiter, the limiter can twist and contort the mix spectrally and dynamically a lot. So when they take the limiter off, the mix actually sounds very unbalanced. So it's useful for me to have that reference point to understand what they're hearing, so then I can kind of get the most out of the master. Otherwise, you can never mix into a limiter, in my opinion. Mixed bus compression, fine, but if you're getting somebody else to master it, just avoid mixing into a limiter because it can create a lot of problems later down the line.
Well, Josh, thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Great questions. Self-round applause. So long, farewell, la vie, and au revoir, adios, goodbye. Leave any comments and questions down below and any future FAQs. Thanks. Bye.